Global crisis because of Russia and Ukraine. How will that affect you? Hello everyone, and welcome back to another episode at Novarise Invest, your channel for financial education. So the Ukraine invasion is official. The turmoil in global economies have already begun, and the peace of many countries is at risk. It is no surprise that hour after hour, this conflict continues to escalate, and the instability not only involves these two countries. In fact, it involves everybody around the globe, whether you're in Asia, whether you are in Australia, Africa, Europe, even in the American continent. The war between Russia and Ukraine will continue to break havoc in many aspects. The chief marketing analyst of APPLAUD, Naeem Aslam, made a comment that a conflict between Russia and Ukraine will raise the price of crude oil barrels to $100 per barrel. And that's exactly what happened within the first couple of hours of invasion. And in case you're wondering, rising oils translates to higher inflation. And that means a serious blow to your money and your savings. CNN Business recently reported that a spike in energy prices will hurt society as a whole. And that could prompt the Federal Reserve and other central banks around the world to raise interest rates in an attempt to control inflation. And whether we like it or not, that conflict between Russia and Ukraine does affect us all, including the United States. And you could be wondering, how could this situation create a personal financial crisis for me? And in the event that does happen, what can I do to make things better? What can I do to protect myself from being hurt on a conflict that it's outside of my control? And that's why we created this episode. But before analyzing the impact or going over the solutions or what you can do, let's take a step back and learn a little bit about the backstory as to how all of this happened and why you should care. Before we start, let me remind you to subscribe to the channel and hit the notifications button. So let's start with the geopolitical standpoint, okay? So this complicated situation started somewhere between March and April of 2021, when Russia mobilizes troops to the Ukraine border. And this immediately set off international alarms and put all the allied countries of both nations in an uncomfortable situation. Now, this military move is being used by Russia to make various demands on the international community, including a ban on Ukraine to join the North Atlantic Treaty Organization known as NATO, and also is demanding a decrease in the presence of NATO soldiers and also military equipment in Europe. And of course, NATO member countries are advocating peace and are asking Russia to withdraw its troops while rejecting Russia's demands. And despite the fact that several countries have decided to distance themselves from the conflict, at least for now, there are others that are already offering loans to support Ukraine. And in addition to that, the US and other countries in Europe and Asia have already applied harsh sanctions against Russia to put pressure on Vladimir Putin. Everyone, this is serious stuff. A senior State Department official told ABC that this conflict represents perhaps the most dangerous moment for peace and security since the Cold War. And of course, this scenario is already generating controversy in the US. According to a poll by the Quinnipiac University, 57% of Americans said that the US should not, send troops to Ukraine if Russia invades. While in a parallel poll, 54% of people polled support Biden's decision to deploy troops to support NATO allies. So that's what's happening on the back end. Now, let's take a look at how this entire situation impacts all the market. And we're going to start with gas prices, okay? So without a doubt, one of the first markets to register price increases, it's always going to be fuel. Gas stations respond to oil price changes. And considering that oil prices have already increased to levels not seen since 2014, the explosion of this conflict will only worsen this situation. In fact, According to the general research company Rystad Energy, Russia produces 9.7 million barrels of oil daily. And the US, believe it or not, is one of the largest consumers of Russian oil, and even more of other derivatives necessary to process crude oils from other countries. And although the United States is increasingly fighting for its energy independence, Russia still is the second largest supplier of crude oil worldwide. Okay? So Russia, second largest supplier. And to add to this, up until 2021, US imports of Russian oil have increased 23%, representing the purchase of more than 800,000 barrels of oil per day. Okay? The financial firms JP Morgan warned that if Russia oil supplies diminishes, the price of crude oil could easily exceed $120 per barrel. This scenario is even more alarming if Russia production drops by half, sending oil prices skyrocketing up to $150 a barrel per day. You see, this is serious stuff. And according to the American Automobile Association, the average price of a gallon of gasoline has already reached its highest level in 7 years. And I'm sure you all know this because you're driving out there. Imagine what will happen with an elevated price per barrel of oil. Now, moving along, let's talk about inflation because, hey, you cannot talk about crisis without involving inflation, right? So inflation is another factor that represents one of the greatest concerns of economics experts and, of course, of society in general. In fact, an analyst at Capital Economics published a report in which they explained that the Russian invasion of Ukraine or the severe increase in sanctions can add up to 2 percentage points to inflation in various markets, particularly affecting Europe. In case of the Federal Reserve, right, so we have the Fed over here, the biggest challenge will be the imminent increase in inflation, which is already at levels never seen before in 40 years, and currently is at 7.5%. We also have supply chain, food, raw materials. All of these will see a huge increase in their prices. And this is due to the increase in the cost of energy. We have an increase in the cost of oil. We also have an increase in the cost of fuel. And all of these are necessary for the transportation and production of thousands of products. And that's not the only thing that's going up. According to Reuters, in January of 2022, food prices increased by 0.9%, and the cost of food consumed at home increased by 1%. And as if this is not enough, strong increases were also recorded in the prices of cereal, bakery products, dairy products, fruits, and vegetables. So that's in terms of inflation. Let's talk about gas and other resources, right? Because they also come into the picture. So the global crisis of gas and other resources will worsen with the Russo-Ukrainian conflict, particularly in Europe. And according to Reuters, the old continent depends on Russia to obtain around 35% of its natural gas. And some analysts are expecting Russia's natural gas exports to Western Europe to be significantly reduced due to the transactions and say that gas prices will increase to alarming levels. And fun fact, in case you didn't know, in 2020, Russia ranked as the largest producer of natural gas worldwide, reaching a supply of 17%. If the Kremlin decreases gas production, either by devoting its effort to the invasion of Ukraine or to use that action as an international threat, the markets for gas and other resources will enter into a supply and demand crisis. To add more to this issue, manufacturing supply chain will also be affected by this conflict or by international sanctions against Russia. Russia is a powerful country, and it has great presence in the production of different resources to supply to the world. And according to ABC News, it is estimated that the Russian Federation produces 49% of nickel. We have 42% of palladium, also produced by Russia, 26% of aluminum, 13% of platinum, 7% of steel, and 4% copper. In fact, the scarcity of resources is something that we've been highlighting in our channel over the past couple of weeks. And this could lead to the next global crisis. And the war between Russia and Ukraine is only worsening the scenario. Now, moving along, let's talk about the stock market, right? Because, who doesn't want to know about it, right? So the stock market, it's highly volatile. And any international action of war or even simple comments about the conflict between Russia and Ukraine can unleash instability in the market. And this happens because investors cannot work with uncertainty. At the end of the day, we're all humans. And when our heads are not clear and when we're experiencing heavy emotions, in this case, fear, it's very hard for people to make the right decision for them because whatever decision they're making, it's being influenced by this harsh emotion that they're feeling. So when you add to this the explosion of oil prices, the international sanctions between countries, the uncontrolled inflation, all of this could create the perfect scenario for a massive stock sell-off. And people's confidence in their currencies and their investment could be severely affected because of this, causing their wealth to decline and their retirement accounts to shrink, right? So very important. So retirement down. And then we also have net worth down. Horrible thing, right? And all of this is translating to a great long-term economic problem for society. Okay? Now, let's talk about another thing that has been on our radar, and that is the topic of debt, right? And one way or the other, we all have been engaged with debt. So in this case, whether you have a mortgage, car loans, or credit cards, these can also see a significant increase in interest rates, okay? And as you know, mortgage interest rates had already increased in the last few weeks, making it even more difficult for people to purchase homes. You see, the increase of inflation will force the Fed to accentuate price controls, and the crisis will probably be no longer treated as transitory. In fact, the Fed announced recently that it's planning to increase interest rates in March. And this will actually make our mortgages, our car loans, more expensive. So for those who are tuning in for the first time in the topic of the rates, this interest rate that we're referring to, it's happening for the first time since 2015. And when you add all of this together, the conflict between Russia and Ukraine, inflation, the increase of prices of oil, the scarcity of resources, and whatever else is going on, this can further complicate the debt scene. Now, I want to talk about something that is somewhat in our radars, but not really, because this typically affects larger corporations or government institutions, and that's on the topic of cyber attacks, right? So according to the Federal Reserve Chairman, Jerome Powell, he recently said that cyber attacks represent one of the biggest concerns for the US financial system. And similarly, Biden announced that if Russia attacks the US or its allies by asymmetric means, such as disruptive cyber attacks against our companies or critical infrastructure, that the US is prepared to respond. In fact, a group of hackers under the pseudonym Anonymous, they have already laid their hands on this conflict, okay? And they're attacking the websites of the UN and also the Chinese Polar Research Institute. And just to help everybody understand the magnitude of this situation, a cyber attack can go beyond the borders of the digital world, just the way it happened last year with the Colonial Pipeline. And I'm sure you all felt the pain, right? Because this attack shut down one of the most important oil pipelines in the US, causing the panic buy of fuel that left many gas stations in the southeast of the country without gas. And in addition to that, cyber attacks also affect the value of cryptos, right? Because crypto prices move in a very similar way to the stock market. And it also depends on factors that cannot be controlled. You see, trust is essential for the crypto market, and this is greatly affected by cyber attacks. Even popular coins like Bitcoin, for example, Bitcoin, it's already in crushed values after reaching its maximum price of $66,000 in November 2021. And it recently dropped about 5%. And its friend, Ether, right here, Ethereum, the second most popular digital currency, for those who don't know, also registered a drop, and it was for 13%. Now, with all this noise that is going on, I'm pretty sure you're probably very overwhelmed, but you still have to take action, right? And you're probably wondering now, what can I do? What should we do? And that's why we're here. We decided to create this episode to keep you informed and also to provide you with multiple options that you could implement to protect your net worth, to protect your finances, and avoid going down with all this crazy madness, right? So what are your options? Before we do that, if you're enjoying this episode, do not forget to hit the like button right here so you can help this episode rank and help others like you looking for information of this kind. So your options are, 1, investing and TIPS, right? So TIPS stands for Treasury Inflation Protected Securities. And these are bonds that are issued and guaranteed by the US government. And they have maturity periods of 5, 10, and 30 years. And the way it works is that during the life of the bond, you will receive interest rates payment, right? And that rate will evolve according to how inflation does. But you might be wondering, okay, I get this, I'm getting interest, but if we're going through inflation and things are rough, how will TIPS be able to pay us any money, right? And so the way it works is that as inflation increases, so does the government's tax collection. And this is the reason why the government can afford to pay bondholders. You see, these type of bonds are not only considered very good investments, but they're also considered very safe investments because they are backed by the US government. And in case you're wondering where can you buy it, you can easily buy it in treasurydirect.gov or .gov. And in fact, why don't I show you on the screen? So here we go. We're in treasurydirect.gov, and all we need to do is to hit this tab here under individuals. And then once you get in there, all you have to do is to scroll down to where it says tips right here. And once you get in, you'll find all kinds of information related to tips, anything from what's the minimum that you can buy to whatever maximum, and then how you can actually invest in there. So I'll leave the link in the description box down below so you can check it out. Now, the second thing you can invest in is, of course, without a doubt, real estate. And you all know this at this point, no matter what happens in the world, real estate will always be a great way to invest your money. There is always demand for housing, right? So you won't have to worry about whether renting it or selling a property after you acquire it. And on top of that, data and history have shown that real estate prices, they do rise over time. Even though there's a correction here and there, over time, in the long term, they do go up. So you will not only be putting your money into an asset, you will also putting it into a tool that is going to help you fight inflation. Another factor that makes real estate very appealing is the ability to obtain financing, because as you know, debt, it's eradicated, for lack of a better term, by inflation. And not just that, the fact that you can get financing means that you can leverage other people's money. And you can leverage other people's money in many ways. Through financing, that's money from the bank, but then you also get to pay off your mortgage through rental income. And rental income is other people's money. So if you come to think of it, through the rental income that you receive, now you're going to use that money to pay for your mortgage. It's like the house, it's being paid off by itself. It's an independent house. Awesome, right? Now, another option, let's talk about Index Universal Life, right? And for those who are brand new to the concept of Index Universal Life, here is a video that I have created a couple of years ago that you should definitely check out after you're done with this episode, of course. But in case you're wondering, what's the main differences between any other type of regular life insurance and Index Universal Life? So the main difference between conventional life insurance and Index Universal Life is that the latter is not subject to a fixed rate. Instead, the funds in your account will correspond to a market index. Let's say, for example, the S&P 500, right? It's one of the many. In addition to that, some insurance company will allow you to divide your capital between fixed rates and also index rates. So that's for Index Universal Life. Now, I want to move on to talk about precious metals, particularly gold and silver, okay? Very important because we've been monitoring the market, and for the last few weeks, there has been an increase in the international price of an ounce of gold. And with Russia's attacks on Ukraine, the price of this precious metal and that silver as well have increased even more. In fact, the first bombing in Ukraine caused the price of gold to increase by 2.73% due to speculation in the market and the massive purchase of this metal by many people to protect their savings. And it's very likely that as the days go by, the price of gold could continue to rise and perhaps even reach all-time highs. Another precious metal that has registered increases in price is silver. In fact, the morning after Russia's attacks on Ukraine caused the price of silver to rise 3.70%, reaching a value of $25 per ounce. And things don't end there. Remember what I told you early in this video, that Russia is a large producer of various metals? Well, these also have registered large jumps in their prices. So for example, in the case of nickel, this went up by 5.86%. In the case of palladium, this actually went up by 8.05%. And in the case of aluminum, this went up by 5.48%. And all of these price jumps could be due to the fact that the world is afraid that there could be a reduction of supply of these metals due to the war. But for now, it is too early to tell. All we have left is to monitor and analyze the movements of the market so that we can determine what's the right next move for us. And now, considering all of the factors that we have covered today, what do you think you're going to do? Are you going to invest your money in any of the options that we proposed today? And if so, let us know in the comments section down below. And while I still have you here, there's an episode right here on the side that talks about the resource crisis that is about to come. And I invite you to check it out so that it can help you make an informed decision to preserve your finances. See you in the next video. Bye-bye.